One of the hardest lessons to learn after experiencing emotional manipulation or repeated mistreatment is that another person's behavior is not always an accurate reflection of your worth. When someone repeatedly criticizes you, humiliates you, dismisses your feelings, or tries to undermine your confidence, it is natural to begin asking painful questions. What is wrong with me? Why do they keep treating me this way? Why do they seem determined to hurt me? These questions arise because the human mind naturally looks inward when it experiences rejection. It searches for an explanation, and too often, it mistakenly concludes that the problem must be within itself. But healthy emotional recovery begins when you understand a different possibility. The way someone treats you often reveals something about their own emotional state, their beliefs, their coping strategies, and the choices they are making. This does not mean every hurtful action comes from the same cause, and it certainly does not excuse harmful behavior. Human beings are complex, and there are many reasons why people act in destructive ways. Still, it is important to recognize that another person's cruelty is not reliable evidence that you deserve to be treated poorly. Think about someone looking into a distorted mirror. The mirror does not accurately reflect reality because the surface itself is warped. If they judge the world only through that mirror, everything they see becomes distorted. In a similar way, people often respond to others through the lens of their own unresolved fears, insecurities, habits, or emotional wounds. Their reactions may tell you far more about how they interpret the world than about who you actually are. This realization is incredibly important because it protects you from accepting every criticism as truth. Constructive feedback can be valuable when it is offered respectfully and honestly, but repeated insults, manipulation, humiliation, or attempts to make you question your own reality are something entirely different. Those behaviors are not healthy communication. They are patterns that damage trust and emotional safety. Many people become trapped because they spend years trying to disprove another person's negative view of them. They believe that if they work harder, become more patient, explain themselves more clearly, or sacrifice enough, the other person will finally recognize their value. Unfortunately, this often leads to emotional exhaustion. The goal keeps moving farther away because the issue was never simply about your efforts. You cannot build a healthy relationship by carrying the entire emotional responsibility yourself. There is an old saying that you cannot pour water into a cup that is turned upside down. No matter how much water you offer, the cup cannot receive it until it is willing to change its position. Relationships work in much the same way. Kindness, honesty, patience, and empathy are meaningful qualities, but they can only flourish where they are met with openness and mutual respect. One person alone cannot create emotional health if the other consistently refuses accountability or healthy communication. One of the most damaging effects of repeated emotional mistreatment is that it gradually changes how people see themselves. At first, criticism feels painful because it contradicts what you know about yourself. Over time, however, repeated negative messages can begin to influence your self-image. You may become hesitant to trust your own judgment. You second-guess your decisions. You apologize excessively. You become afraid of making mistakes because you expect criticism, regardless of what you do. This gradual erosion of confidence does not happen overnight. It often develops so slowly that people barely notice it until they look back and realize how much they have changed. Activities they once enjoyed now create anxiety. Opinions they once expressed confidently now remain unspoken. Dreams they once pursued enthusiastically become postponed because they no longer believe in themselves as they once did. The encouraging truth is that confidence can be rebuilt. It begins by questioning the beliefs you have accepted about yourself. Ask yourself, who taught me this belief? Is there real evidence that it is true? Would I speak to someone I love the way I now speak to myself? These questions are powerful because they interrupt automatic patterns of self-criticism. They create space for a more balanced understanding of who you really are. Healthy confidence is not pretending to be perfect. It is recognizing both your strengths and your weaknesses without allowing either to define your entire identity. You can acknowledge mistakes without believing you are a failure. You can accept areas for growth without concluding that you are unworthy of respect. Another important part of healing is understanding the difference between empathy and responsibility. Compassion allows us to recognize that someone else may be struggling. Responsibility means carrying the burden of solving those struggles. These are not the same thing. You can feel compassion for another person's difficulties while still maintaining healthy boundaries. You can recognize that someone has experienced pain without allowing them to repeatedly pass that pain on to you. You can understand why certain behaviors developed without accepting those behaviors as healthy or acceptable. This distinction protects both kindness and wisdom. Many people believe that setting boundaries is unkind. In reality, healthy boundaries create the conditions where respect can exist. A boundary does not exist to punish another person. It exists to communicate what is necessary for emotional well-being. It says, "This is how I need to be treated if this relationship is going to remain healthy." Some people will respect those boundaries, others may resist them. How another person responds is information. It reveals whether they are willing to participate in a relationship built on mutual respect. One of the greatest shifts in recovery occurs when your attention moves away from trying to understand every detail of another person's behavior and begins focusing on your own growth. Instead of asking, "Why did they do this?" you begin asking, "What do I need in order to heal?" That question changes everything because it directs your energy towards something you can actually influence. Healing often begins quietly. You reconnect with supportive friends. You rediscover hobbies that once brought you joy. You begin exercising because it helps you feel stronger rather than because you are trying to earn someone's approval. You learn new skills. You spend more time in peaceful environments. Gradually, your identity expands beyond the painful relationship. The person who once occupied so much space in your thoughts no longer defines your emotional world. There may still be moments when memories return. Certain places, songs, or conversations may remind you of what happened. That is completely normal. Healing does not erase the past. It changes your relationship with it. You remember without becoming trapped. You reflect without reliving. You learn without remaining emotionally imprisoned. Eventually, you begin to recognize something remarkable. The opinions that once carried enormous power over your life have become much quieter. Not because the past changed, not because every question was answered, but because your understanding of yourself became stronger than someone else's misunderstanding of you. This is one of the greatest victories in emotional healing. You stop allowing another person's behavior to define your identity. You stop interpreting every criticism as truth. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's ability to appreciate it. Instead, you build your life upon something far more stable: your character, your values, your integrity, your compassion, your resilience. These qualities remain yours regardless of how another person chooses to behave. And once your identity is rooted in those deeper foundations, you discover a kind of peace that no insult, rejection, or attempt to diminish you can permanently take away. That peace is not built upon another person's approval. It is built upon the quiet certainty that your value has never depended on someone else's inability to see it. There is a moment in every healing journey when you begin to understand one of the most liberating truths a person can ever discover. You cannot build your life around the hope that someone else will finally become the person you needed them to be. For a long time, many people remain emotionally connected to someone who has repeatedly hurt them, not because they enjoy the pain, but because they keep believing that one more conversation, one more explanation, or one more chance will finally change everything. They imagine that if they can only find the perfect words, the other person will suddenly understand how much damage they caused and choose to treat them differently. Hope by itself is not a weakness. Hope is often what helps people survive difficult seasons. But hope becomes unhealthy when it keeps you attached to a pattern that consistently harms your well-being. There is a profound difference between hoping for growth and refusing to accept reality. One invites wisdom, the other keeps you trapped. Many people spend years trying to earn treatment that should have been given freely from the beginning. They work harder, become more patient, sacrifice more of themselves, and silence their own needs because they believe love must be proven through endless endurance. They convince themselves that if they can just become a little more understanding, a little more forgiving, or a little less demanding, the relationship will finally become healthy. But healthy relationships are not built on one person carrying all the emotional weight. Imagine two people rowing a boat across a wide river. If only one person continues rowing while the other refuses to participate, the boat begins turning in circles. The harder one person rows alone, the more exhausted they become, yet they never truly reach the destination they hoped for. Relationships work much the same way. Lasting trust requires mutual effort. Respect requires mutual responsibility. Emotional safety requires both people choosing honesty, accountability, and kindness. One of the most painful realizations is recognizing that another person's willingness to change is something you cannot control. You may encourage growth, you may communicate honestly, you may express your needs with patience and clarity, but you cannot force another human being to become emotionally healthy. That decision belongs to them alone. Accepting this truth can feel heartbreaking because it asks you to release something you desperately wanted to believe was possible. It means letting go of the fantasy that one perfect conversation will erase years of unhealthy patterns. It means acknowledging that love, no matter how genuine, cannot replace another person's responsibility to grow. Yet hidden within that painful realization is tremendous freedom. The moment you stop trying to change another person, you begin reclaiming the energy that was always meant to build your own life. Think about how much time people often spend analyzing someone else's behavior. They replay conversations while driving to work. They lose sleep imagining different outcomes. They read old messages repeatedly, searching for hidden meanings. They ask friends for endless opinions. Their emotional world becomes centered around understanding someone else's choices. Now imagine redirecting that same energy. Instead of spending an hour wondering why someone ignored your boundaries, you spend that hour learning a new skill. Instead of replaying painful conversations, you take a walk that clears your mind. Instead of checking whether someone has changed, you begin investing in your own physical, emotional, and spiritual health. Slowly, your life begins moving forward again. Healing often begins with surprisingly ordinary decisions. You wake up and make your bed. You prepare nourishing meals. You exercise, not to impress anyone, but because your body deserves care. You reconnect with friends whose conversations leave you feeling encouraged rather than drained. You read books that expand your thinking. You develop hobbies that remind you there is joy beyond survival. These small decisions may not feel dramatic, but they quietly rebuild your identity. Many people lose parts of themselves during unhealthy relationships. They stop pursuing dreams. They abandon interests that once excited them. They become so focused on managing another person's moods or reactions that they forget who they were before the relationship consumed so much of their attention. Recovery is not only about leaving unhealthy dynamics behind, it is about returning to yourself. It is about remembering the qualities that existed long before someone else questioned them. Your curiosity, your creativity, your kindness, your resilience, your ability to laugh freely, your capacity to dream about the future. These parts of you were never destroyed. They simply became buried beneath fear, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. As healing continues, you begin noticing something remarkable. Situations that once overwhelmed you no longer have the same power. You become less reactive. You pause before responding. You recognize manipulation more quickly. You trust your instincts instead of immediately doubting them. This is not because life has become easier. It is because you have become stronger. Healthy boundaries also begin feeling less frightening. In the past, saying no may have filled you with guilt or fear. You worried that protecting yourself would cause conflict or rejection. Over time, however, you begin understanding that boundaries are not walls built to keep everyone out. They are doors that help determine who is willing to enter your life with respect. People who genuinely care about you may not always agree with your boundaries, but they will respect your right to have them. Those who consistently refuse to respect them reveal valuable information about the kind of relationship they are offering. Perhaps the greatest transformation happens when you stop measuring success by whether another person finally appreciates you. Instead, you begin measuring success differently. Did I remain true to my values today? Did I treat myself with respect? Did I communicate honestly? Did I protect my peace? Did I continue growing? These questions create a foundation that no longer depends upon external approval. There may still be moments when memories surface. You may occasionally wonder what might have happened if things had been different. That is part of being human. Healing does not require pretending the relationship never mattered. It simply means refusing to let the past dictate every decision you make in the present. Eventually, one quiet morning arrives and you notice something has changed. You wake up thinking about your own goals instead of someone else's behavior. You become excited about opportunities rather than consumed by old disappointments. You begin making plans without wondering whether another person will approve. The emotional weight that once seemed impossible to carry has become lighter, not because someone apologized, not because someone finally admitted they were wrong, not because they suddenly became the person you always hoped they would be, but because you stopped waiting for them to determine your future. You discovered that your happiness was never meant to be borrowed from another person's choices. It was always something you could cultivate within yourself. That realization changes everything. Because once your peace is built upon your own values rather than someone else's approval,